Okay, thank you all for being here. My name is Teddy Kimball. I'm a vegetable farmer in Pine Island where I live with my wife and two young kids. I'm running against Steve Jacob in the Republican primary on August 11th for state senate here in our district. I'm running against him and his one-dimensional platform with an independent platform of bottom-up, community-driven policies. It's not trying to push social issues on you and your family. And my message to all Minnesotans, but independents especially, is that you have a right to vote in the primary. And I argue you have a responsibility to do so. Your job is to find the most principled, independent candidates and find the party that they're in and do your best to have them represent us in November. The only rule is you only can vote for candidates in one party, but then come November, you're free to vote for whoever you want. Okay, so I'm here as part of 5 campaign events across our district. I started in Pine Island, where I gave a good faith overview of the Pine Island data center and what I would do to limit the effects of hyperscale data centers on our communities. And the 3-point plan is to cap their special data center sales tax exclusion, favors the hyperscalers, to adjust our noise laws to include C-weighted and Z-weighted averages that will actually capture the low frequency hum and vibration that they emit, and to require a certificate of need so they can't freely create backup diesel generators that pollute our communities without kind of showing the need for that. Last week I was in Plainview, breaking down fraud and discussing how that we can end it by looking at the problem structurally and stopping the misaligned incentives. And I specifically made a call to action to end the multitude of daycare and childcare programs and the money that's been involved in fraud, and to redirect those resources into universal health care within our existing school district where we have local oversight and management where families need it most. Today I'm going to be making the case for why it is progressive to end income taxes, inherited taxes in our district. And then on Wednesday, I will be in Wabasha making the agrarian argument to legalize small farms and natural homes across the state. And finally on Saturday, I'm going to go to Red Wing and explain why our election system is rigged to favor the establishment Democrats and Republicans, and what changes we can make to let independents and third parties join the race once again. So today I'm trying to make the progressive arguments for the case that eliminating income taxes is progressive. And I'm not trying to make the case that we should start becoming progressive about our taxation. Rather, I'm going to make the argument that we've always had that as a goal, but that the dynamics of the economy and how we structure our lives have changed and created 3 separate stages of taxation in Minnesota to better reflect those progressive ideals, and why that's not true anymore, and why I call for a 4th. So our taxation in Minnesota begins at the founding of our territory when we levied a 0.25% property tax uniformly across the state. By the time we obtained our statehood, we had raised this to 0.5% to cover more expenses and responsibilities as a state. But the important thing to remember is back then, the property tax included all intangible property, money, investments, gold. And so this was really a 0.5% wealth tax uniformly across Minnesota. And this made sense because at the time, not a lot of folks were making their income or making large amounts of income. We were mostly subsistence farmers and small businesses that were beneficial to their communities. The cases where this wasn't necessarily true, we added a 6% gross earnings tax on the railroad businesses, the telephone companies, and the large freight corporations. And then we added an inheritance tax for the first time graduated, so the wealthy paid more in inheritance than the common folk. And throughout 60 years, income inequality slowly rose until we get to about the 1920s and 30s when it's at an all-time high. And these basic tax structures are still in place. And so the Great Depression hits. Personal income, the little bit there was, is cut in half. It becomes difficult for people to pay their taxes, and tax delinquencies rise. And as a result, assessments fall. We end up in a little bit of a cycle where the state has less and less revenue and the people have less and less ability to pay it. And so in 1933, the legislature convenes to solve this. And they reason, quote, "A reasonable income tax will not deprive any citizen of the necessities of life. Under present conditions, few, if any, farmers have a net income and thousands of homeowners are unemployed. Yet they are charged enormous taxes. Most property is non-productive, but is taxed at a high rate. No citizen will be required to pay an income tax unless at the end of the year the deductions and exemptions have been made, there is a net taxable income left. A person who has to pay any income tax will be lucky. End quote. And so indeed, they passed the first state sales tax. It started at 1% on your first 1,000, 2% on the next 1,000, all the way up to a graduated rate of 10%. Corporations paid a flat 6% earnings tax. And we started to increase a number of other taxes on industries, businesses, excises, fees, and motor fuel taxes to pay for government, but to reduce inequality. And in 1945, the state made the decision to exempt intangible property from taxes. So for the first time, wealth was no longer taxed. But this wasn't really that impactful for two reasons. One, property taxes had continuously shrunk to be only 60, then 50, 40% of the share of the government. But at the same time, when you include federal tax rates, in 1945, those highest earners were taxed at a 94% rate. So we're not at a period right now where a lot of people have wealth. We're at a period where a lot of people are accumulating wealth. And so it makes sense to add an income tax to stop that and to drop a property tax on people's wealth when people don't have a lot to start with, the common. And so this continued until income inequality bottomed out in our state around the 1960s and 70s. And throughout that time, because of that, we have started to dial back on the income tax levels. But there's also a number to pay for a multitude of programs and to capture runaway industries. We've added all sorts of little fees and taxes on specific industries and specific fields. And I think that this complexity has also allowed large corporations and the wealthy to carve out exemptions just for them. And so now we're at a place where income inequality is at the highest it's ever been since the Great Depression. And I think a lot of folks, working families, small businesses, retirees on Social Security, and farmers who are trying to pass down the farm are feeling a strong squeeze and feeling the burden, not just of the actual financial contribution, but especially for small businesses, having to navigate through a huge regulatory burden and huge tax code that puts our largest corporations at advantage, who have teams of accountants and lawyers. And so I believe that right now, a lot of the tension and struggles we're feeling is because we've always had a progressive ideal towards taxation in this state, but we're no longer meeting that ideal. It's time for the third major shift in tax policy and to usher in a fourth era for Minnesota. And so I believe that if we acknowledge right now that the wealthiest have a greater share of the pie than ever before and are making that wealth not necessarily through their hard work, making jobs, producing goods for people, but through earning money through their investments and earning money through a global financial system, we acknowledge that and revert to our original tax system in this state and bring back the wealth tax. We can eliminate the rationale and argument for why we have an income tax in the first place, and which no longer holds, why we have an inheritance tax in the first place, and which may no longer be that effective for the farmers. And so my call is for Minnesota and for the United States to simplify the regulatory and tax burden for small businesses, working families, retirees on Social Security, and farmers that are passing down that farm, and start putting that burden on the wealthy 1%, control a large amount of the resources, and that take advantage of the global financial system we're in today. So thank you all very much. My name is Teddy Kimball. I'm running against Steve Jacob on August 11th in the Republican primary, and I'm asking for you and all the independents out there to support my campaign. Thank you all.